This is the story of a friend of mine, an amateur fisherman, and such an amateur that any pro, seeing him on the river, will soon try to wind up his fishing rods and leave fishing to a more worthy master. So Alexei is an experienced fisherman who has seen a lot. And among his stories about giant catfish and cannibal pikeperch, there is a terrible story about one unsuccessful trip. To believe or not to believe, it's a personal matter. I'm only a storyteller. So, everything in order from the first person and in the manner of the source, so as not to spoil the impression. My father-in-law begged me for a long time to go to the Volga. He has a dacha 50 kilometers away, and you can easily go out in the cold at 5 o'clock and in 40 minutes already unwind the fishing rods to catch the morning dawn. But for me, this approach is rather disrespectful to fishing. A good place must still be found, bait, equipment, so a rush can only dabble. However, my relative was persistent, and once I gave in to his entreaties, but with a condition. We decided as follows: I leave on my tank Neva brand in the evening, pick up a place and prepare it for morning fishing, and father-in-law will join me later. All the same, he does not know the river, and in preparation I do not tolerate other people's hands all interfere with me. That's the kind of man I am. I took equipment, tackle, bait, and additives, half a trunk, and went to the river. On the map traced, where are the territories and roads, so as not to accidentally wander into the reserve or any preserve. I left at daylight. Most of the road was figuring out how and what I will catch. In the car, a whole arsenal of fishing rods and spinning rods, but that time there was no soul to anything. It was an anxious and silly feeling. Usually I am happy when I get out to the water alone like that, but here I could turn around and drive back. I thought that it was because I would be fishing with my father-in-law, not my usual partner, so I was nervous, though I had never observed such a feeling. It was getting dark quickly, as it should be in the beginning of September. Outside the tank flashed forests and villages. The road looped to the northeast. In the distance I could hear the noise of a train. A railroad was running nearby. Already at dusk I drove out to the tracks and, using GPS tips, got close to the river. The place was good. Even in semi-darkness I could distinguish a sloping hill overgrown with birch trees and a sloping cliff overlooking the river. I put the car closer to the grove under the hill and decided to walk with a flashlight and see what I had to work with. The cliff was gentle and narrow, overgrown up to the waist with grass and viola, but it was quite suitable for fishing. The strip of reeds in this place was sparse and low, so I didn't even have to cut windows. I went to get an axe. I cut down some particularly sprawling bushes, mowed down the grass. I put a folding chair and made a fire. Boiled porridge on the cake, added vanilla and strawberry additives to this miracle that's how fish taste, and threw it warm. Threw it into the river. Barked up the place. I smoked, turned off all the flashlights, except for the headlamp, and looked at the water. And I thought to myself, the anxiety only got worse. An oppressive feeling appeared, as if I had done something bad to someone. I waved it off. Probably it's autumn moping. I finished and decided to cast a fishing rod for the sake of interest, to measure the depth, and to get to know the place better. I settled down, cast, and waited for a nibble. In about 20 minutes the float moved away, smoothly so, but against the current. I hook and take out a fry me, aka burbot. What a surprise. A rare trophy in these latitudes, but honorable. I cast, and in 10 minutes I again drag a fish a little more than a palm to dry land. What is this place so fishy? 2 burbot in half an hour, and it's no trouble that they are small. I renewed the bait and cast the rod again. A nibble, and already the 3rd burbot in the cage. I stopped and thought. I remembered a fishing belief. I myself do not believe in such nonsense, but then I remembered and got a little scared. People say that burbot nibbles on drowned men. Even someone from Veteran Fishermen told me how a corpse covered with burbot was lifted from the bottom. So I'm standing on a cliff. I'm looking at the river. All around is night and silence. Burbot are splashing in the cage, and bad thoughts are swarming in my head. Okay, I think I'll cast one more time and go to sleep in the car. I squatted down, looking, no bites. A small ripple runs through the water. I hear something thumping in the reeds, and such measured slaps on the water as if someone is swimming along the edge at the very shore. I turn my gaze and freeze in shock. There's a man standing in waist-deep water. He's not doing anything special, just standing there looking at me. And I, taking advantage of the moment, look at him and am even more surprised. He doesn't squint at my flashlight. He looks pale and water streams down from his hair. And what's strange is that he's not dressed for swimming. He's wearing a striped club shirt, and I can see that he's wearing a belt with a cowboy belt buckle under his jeans. He's looking at me mean, but he's not making any moves. He's either a drug addict or an alcoholic. I called out to him, "What do you want? Why are you scaring the fish?" And he put his hands around his shoulders and lowered his eyes. I heard inarticulate mumbling. I couldn't make out anything, like some kind of gurgling. I understood only one phrase, "I'm cold," as I was squatting. I began to crawl backwards with a goose step, and the night guest was shaking and muttering. I got 5 meters away from the water, and I couldn't reach the night guest with my flashlight. I can only hear his voice. I scolded myself for cowardice and decided to address the man once again. "Climb to the shore. If you're cold, you'll warm up by the fire." But in response, I heard such a fierce shriek. "You can't." It almost turned into a shriek and a blow on the water. Everything went quiet. I got up and rushed to the car. I started it, turned it to the river, and turned on the headlights to get a better look at the place. No one's there. Where'd the man go? And where did he come from so strange? I gave up on fishing, wrapped up my gear, and drove back. And I got goosebumps running down my back and an unpleasant chill on the back of my neck. Already on the highway at the crossroads, I almost hit a car. 2 local athletes came out and started to yell at me and threaten me with a showdown. And I told them that they could take me anywhere but far away from this place. The guys wondered why I was so frightened, why they were people too. I told them everything as it was. I saw the guys smoking nervously and looking at each other. And then they told me that they had a visitor who disappeared at the beginning of summer under that description. Apparently, he fell into the river drunk. They never found his body. We said goodbye without complaint, and I went back to my place with a firm desire to get drunk, but at home and away from the river. I went to my grandmother's village one summer when I was very young, 3 to 4 years old. The village was 100 kilometers from Syktyvkar and a little closer to Ust-Kulom, 7 kilometers from the nearest large settlement. There were only 10 to 15 houses there, and at least half of them were empty. It is located, in fact, in the forest on a small clearing. The inhabitants are old grandmothers, old alcoholics, and their children, also alcoholics. Almost all of them have some kind of livestock. My grandmother liked to drink, and every night when she drank, she would tell me to close the shutters at night if she didn't. I faithfully closed them every night, lay down on my bunk, and slept soundly until morning. Then once I asked my grandmother why I closed them, to which I got the answer, "You're still young, you won't understand," and after that I didn't close them to spite her. That night something strange happened. First I woke up from some strange feeling, as if my stomach was clenching from fear, but there was no fear. Then I realized that someone was walking past the windows in the vegetable garden, looking in the windows and quietly tapping the glass with a fingernail. I didn't understand at all what was going on. I was about to get up, to come closer to the window and look, but I heard from the side of my grandmother's bed a loud whisper, "Don't get up." Something walked along the walls, knocked on the windows, banged on the walls, and when it began to lighten up, it left safely. In the morning I got a slap from my grandmother for not closing the shutters. She explained that it was the guardian of the forest where the village was located, or something like that. Of course, from then on I always closed the shutters. The second story is from the neighborhood of the same village. We went there on vacation with the whole family. I am no longer 3 years old, but 5 years old. I still remember that night guest, but somehow I am not afraid, because I already consider myself an adult and brave, not like a year and a half ago. My father took me fishing for the morning bite. At 4 o'clock we left the house. It was getting light outside, the first rays of the sun, the birds were singing. There were 3 places for fishing a shallow lake, in which practically nothing was found, but I liked it there, because there were a lot of frogs and toads of huge sizes in the water, a river, also shallow. But there you could catch all kinds of perch and generally bigger fish than in the shallow lake and another lake, dark, deep and big at least. It seemed so to me at that time. We went to that big lake. It takes about an hour to walk to it on the way you pass through one completely abandoned village, even smaller than the one where my grandmother lived, 5 houses and 2 barns plus a small 2-story barrack. My father, when he quarreled with my mother, would always take me away and we would go there, we would grill kebabs. He would drink vodka and I would drink duchessa. This village was not even on a clearing, the houses were built directly between the trees. And so my father and I came to the lake, on the other side of which there were 3 more houses, but only one was clearly visible. The others were only partially visible from behind the trees. My father and I had never been there, because my grandmother said that it was a cursed place where you should not be alive. And afterwards she quietly told my father something about fishing on that lake, using profanity and calling him all sorts of names for the fact that he decided to fish there at all. But my father was a communist atheist realist and did not believe in any devilish things. In the end, he agreed with the grandmother, learned a couple of things from her, gave her a couple of promises, and we went. We are sitting, fishing. My father is watching the float, sipping beer. I just look at the water, at the house, which is visible behind the trees on the other side of the lake, catching butterflies and generally having fun as I can, because fishing itself has never fascinated me, and still does not. I run past my father and suddenly he grabs my hand, sits next to me, points his hand in the direction of the house and says, I can't see well, he was already 46 years old at that time, a welder all his life. Look, is someone walking there? I looked there carefully and for a long time I was beginning to think that my father was playing a trick on me. But then I see that someone comes out of the house, goes deep into the woods, then comes back with someone else, and both go into the house. For some reason this sight sent a shiver of fear down my spine. The houses on the other side are abandoned long ago. The one you can see normally has a partially collapsed roof, broken windows, and is almost covered with moss, and there are at least 2 people walking there. It's unlikely to be drug addicts and alcoholics, because if there are drug addicts, everyone knows about them, and in general, the locals avoid those houses several kilometers away. My father also turned pale, sitting and looking there. Then he said, Let's pack up quietly and go home. He was sitting there, quietly winding the fishing line, while I was putting everything we had got in my backpack: beer, thermos with tea, bags with sandwiches. Then I look over to the other side of the lake and there's 3. I don't even know what to call them. In general, 3 white and smooth, no hair, nipples, navels and other reliefs of the usual body creatures looked directly at us, absolutely motionless, which is even more frightening. They stood just like mannequins from the store in principle, even similar in shape, except for the eyes, which stood out very strongly against the white background of their skin. They stood and looked at us for a couple of minutes, then began to walk around the lake, 2 on one side, the 3rd on the other. They moved at a regular walking pace. I felt like I was nailed to the spot. My father grabbed me by the scruff of the neck and dragged me into the woods. My backpack and fishing rod were left there on the bank. In general, we returned home safely. My grandmother then long swore at my father for not believing her, and my father then drank like hell for a week. We never came back for the fishing rod and backpack.